Good morning. Welcome to Energy Circle webinar, Energy Storage in ASEAN from a Business Development Perspective. My name is Jane Lee. I'm a research analyst of Leader Associates, the leading international renewable energy event organizer. We are glad to welcome our speaker, Jack Kneeland, Principal in Vector Energy Advisory and Senior Advisor at Atlantic Group. Jack brings over 15 years of experience in strategy consulting and transaction advisory in the energy, clean energy, and related sectors in Asia. As a principal in Vector Energy Advisory, he has developed and led a joint new energy practice in completing dozens of consulting and advisory engagements in renewable energy, natural gas, and power. Jack is also a senior advisor at Atlantic Group, the consultancy providing expert economic and commercial consulting services to business and governments throughout the Asia-Pacific region. Today, Jack will share his unique opinion and developing business in the ASEAN energy storage market through the points like energy storage opportunities and market status in different countries. It is reported that 2018 saw a great leap in global energy storage market with a newly deployed capacity of 3.3 gigawatts and 6 gigawatt hours. Among these, the Asia and Pacific region occupied about 45% of the world's installed battery storage capacity. The ASEAN energy storage market is in infancy, but booming with positive prospects and attracts more and more developers as well. The goal of this webinar is going to provide some insights of ASEAN energy storage market and a business development way for this particular market. So Jack, please go ahead. I leave the controls to you.
Great. Thank you very much, Jane, and thank you for a very good introduction. I think you set the scene up very nicely. I think energy storage in ASEAN is a fascinating topic and a very interesting business opportunity. But as you mentioned, it is in its infancy, and so a bit of a business development or a long-term perspective is required. You know, that having been said, I think we've all seen how quickly renewable energy is taken off around the world, how individual countries in this region, such as Vietnam, now have moved forward very quickly. And energy storage itself is moving very, very quickly around the world. So I do think that while energy storage may be today in its infancy, we may see it in its adolescence and its maturity a lot more quickly than we think. So with that in mind, I wanted to approach this fascinating topic from a business development perspective. You know, I know a lot of people look at energy storage quite generically, look at the world or market research type perspectives, or we hear a lot of views on technologies, which are obviously very important, which technologies will emerge. But what I wanted to do is to look at from the eye or the perspective of someone looking across the markets across Asia with a product, with a service, with capital to invest, and look at what they need to do or to think about to begin to participate in, like, as I said, what's a very exciting and dynamic market, but also quite a diverse and different one. So with that, I'd like to take a step back and look at what I'll cover in the presentation today, and I'll do this very, very quickly and get into the heart of it in a minute. But I do want to focus on how I see a market entry or a business development process and how that differs from other analytical processes. Energy storage in particular for me is very much of a niche or a segment business. Around the world, we look at energy storage as a potential to change the world, to transform the energy system, and to bring on the low carbon energy of the future that we hope will occur. And that certainly is the holy grail. That is the big hope for energy storage over the longer term, that it does transform our system. But in the shorter term, there are a lot of applications that I'll talk about in a minute. I think it's very important going forward that we look at the actual application that a battery will be used in. And I'll make the note up front that although I'm really talking about battery storage in this, I believe very much that there's roles for all sorts of technologies, that hydrogen, that batteries, that mechanical storage, or other technologies may become the best option for. But at the moment, I think it is batteries, and I think that's the context I'm talking in. But please do see this as much more broad. But I think the key point to start off is from a battery perspective or a storage perspective. This is very much a market segment business, and it's not that one country is better than the other. It may be that there are opportunities in different segments in different markets. So later on in the presentation, I'll walk you through a bit of an identification, a screening, and a ranking process to look at where opportunities may emerge in countries, both right now in the near term and the longer term. I also think it's very important for companies, and I'll talk a bit more about this, to develop a view on markets to see where they think they're going to go, see if you can understand the flavor of that country, what the regulatory personality is, what the country itself, its identity is, and where that's likely to lead it in terms of energy storage development. I think it's also very important for companies to be able to match their opportunities, their offerings to markets here. ASEAN markets tend to be small. I think projects are going to tend to be small. Returns in the near term may be lower than a lot of companies are hoping or expecting. And I think it's very important to be realistic and to know before going in what opportunities exist for your product and what changes need to be made. Then again, I think it's crucial to understand markets, to understand customers, to understand the business models. Those are all going to be different here. Partners are very important. There may be some unique businesses where you can get in without working with local partners, but broadly, it is an important part of the package. And then finally, of course, is the execution strategy. So with that, what I'm going to do is go through and talk about 6 major countries here: Indonesia, Malaysia, Myanmar, Philippines, Thailand, and Vietnam. And as you'll see, I've highlighted the last 3, Philippines, Thailand, and Vietnam, really because I do believe that not only is that where the largest opportunities are, but it's where some more opportunities are emerging in the near term. Exception to that, and I'll talk about that more, maybe Myanmar and microgrids, but I'll talk about that in a bit more detail in a moment. What I also just want to touch on here, and I'll focus again in more detail, is how to define an energy storage application. As I said, one market may be very good for one application and not so good for another application. So it's very important to be able to package and understand the business model or the application. And the ones I'm using in this, and I'll describe in more detail, are a renewable energy hybrid generator, grid-based batteries, behind-the-meter configuration at the consumer site, and microgrids. As I said, I'll talk about those a lot more as we go ahead throughout the presentation. So with that, what I'd like to do is take a moment and take a look at the overall topic and theme of the presentation today, which is really a twofold topic. One is to look at energy storage in ASEAN, and then 2 is to look at the business perspective, which I've covered to some degree. I think it's very important to realize that ASEAN is a very unique region with a lot of variety and some cohesiveness across countries. But to me, ASEAN is more of a collection of countries from a business development perspective than it is a region with its own cohesion. And so I think the first pass is to look at country level opportunities and then look at how those can be pulled together into a regional strategy. I also think ASEAN is and is going to continue to be a niche market and not a gold rush. I think we've seen this in renewable energy, where committed players who are willing to understand the market and commit to it have been extremely successful in their businesses that have done very well in this region. However, I think some of the larger companies, the larger participants have and will continue to see more exciting opportunities in some of the larger markets of China, India, to some degree Latin America. And ASEAN's been a bit of a laggard and may well be. But there is potential for some very positive change. Things could look quite different. And there are niches emerging for the players who are willing to understand and match local opportunities. So the goal of my presentation really is to provide a framework for understanding these markets and look at how markets are likely to develop. This is not a market research report. It's really more of an idea and a think piece. So I wouldn't rely on this for data. For each of these, I have a table that shows these in a lot more detail where each of the opportunities are. But this really is part of building and maintaining a screening process. And again, I think it's very crucial that every company or every organization maintain its own screening process. I talked quite a lot about what a business development perspective is. I think Jane may have introduced in the beginning that my background is to a large degree in finance. I work for some of the larger investment banks. I worked in equity research. And I say investment decision-making is in my DNA. What I really love to do is to look out at markets to find out what I think is likely to happen, what are the other possible opportunities, to look at what drives those opportunities, what creates change, what big bets are players making, what are the opportunities, the big decisions to make, who are the winners, who are the losers, and what's determining that, and how you in turn can be a winner. So with that in mind, I'm looking at the presentation with about a 5-year planning horizon and look forward. And again, I think this kind of approach applies to any and all companies looking to work in the sector, whether you're selling equipment, whether it's a service, or whether it's investment or otherwise. So now I wanted to take a bit more of a detailed look at energy storage itself. And I think it's very, very important, as I mentioned, when looking at energy storage, to be able to categorize and understand and package individual opportunities uniquely. There are lots of very good ways that people do this. So I like to group them by application. I like to group them by revenue stream. But really, this is just one way of looking at it. There are a lot of good frameworks out there. If you look at it differently or like a different framework, certainly use that one. The main point is that this is a device for looking at and understanding opportunities. And really what I think is very important is mastering the revenue model, making sure that you understand who's going to pay for the services of the energy storage system and how it earns money and makes profits. So the first of the 4 models I'll talk about, and I have a graphic coming up next, is an RE hybrid generator. This is generally a battery that's located with a renewable energy storage, a renewable energy generator, so it's above the meter, they're both located at the same place, selling down into the grid, and the battery serves to improve the generation profile of the renewable energy plant. The second one is a grid-based battery. This can be operated by the private sector or the public sector. It can provide a range of services everywhere from frequency management all the way to offsetting transmission and distribution investments, so it can replace some physical infrastructure. But it's a battery that's sitting on the transmission or distribution grid and making the system work better. The third model, and I think this is a very good example of how different these are, is a behind-the-meter system that works at the consumer site. These are typically at an industrial facility where the metering is sophisticated. They have demand charges and so forth, which really does facilitate the economics of it. But in this region, they also work extremely well in situations like the Philippines, where solar prices are very, very low relative to the wholesale price, and regenerating solar creates a huge value proposition for the battery. The final one we have is microgrids, which are either a standalone system off of the grid or sometimes connected to the grid. Where you can, the typical use is to provide access to people that don't have electricity now, or to improve the quality of electricity. You'll also see on the right a whole set of revenue streams. I probably won't go through these in too much detail, because I think these have been covered quite well elsewhere. But the key point here is to understand what each of these do. Does this match how you view the world, and to understand how your battery or how a battery in an application will earn revenue. And I think this is crucial, again, for everyone, whether you're selling a service, whether you're selling equipment, whether you're making a financial investment. If overall the economics of an application don't work, that application is going to have limited opportunities. It really is crucial that the economics make sense over the longer term. I don't think ASEAN is going to be heavily subsidized markets for the long term. I think these countries have become quite aware of pricing, I think it's the end of the huge subsidy era, and so projects really have to work on their own economics, and it's crucial that anyone looking to participate in this segment understands those. So just to be clear, I want to take a little bit more detailed picture on what each of those are in terms of the definition I'm using. Again, definitions shift a lot, and as we go through this, it becomes quite clear that these distinctions aren't quite as distinct as we hope they are. There's some overlap here, but I do think this is a very valuable window and way to look at the system. At the very top, on the top line, we have the conventional generators going through transmission and distribution to consumers. very old style power system, the way the electricity market worked for decades up until very, very recently. And although it looks very simple here, I think it's important to realize the electricity system has always been very complicated. So this is a complicated system to start with. Over the last decade or perhaps more, we started to see renewable energy generators come in. And so this was a new aspect of the system insofar as renewable energy generators can be small, can be distributed, can be intermittent, but they still are selling in reasonably centralized type power into the system. But on the right, we start to see some change where consumers start to come in and consumers produce renewable energy, become prosumers, and that's changed the system quite a lot. So energy storage fits on top of these complex and evolving electricity systems. And I'll just cover the four that I talked about before and a little bit on other aspects. So, again, the renewable energy hybrid here, you can see it's a renewable energy generator sitting with a battery above the meter, selling down into T&D system. Number two is the grid-based battery sitting on the grid and performing grid services. Number three, behind the meter, is sitting at either an industrial facility or a consumer facility. It's either with renewable energy or standalone. Again, in this region, I think the renewable energy combination is going to be very compelling, but that it's behind the meter at the consumer site and often deregulated. Then number four here is a microgrid, and a microgrid in many ways provides all the systems of a grid, so it sits in many ways across this. Where things start to get interesting, and I'll jump forward to number six, is electric vehicles. Electric vehicles don't fit neatly into any of these, but obviously represent a massive penetration of batteries onto the system itself, and can very much interact with each of these pieces. Electric vehicles could be a core part of a microgrid. They could be a piece of a consumer use or behind the grid application, behind the meter application, or could work as a part of grid support directly. So they play a hybrid role across the system here. And then, as I mentioned at the outset, there are actually a number of other storage technologies, from flywheels to other mechanical methods to hydrogen and so forth. I'm not looking at what technology is going to win or lose. I think it'll be a very interesting future and a role for everything. But just wanted to point out that although I'm talking a lot about batteries, there are other storage, and this applies to them as well. So with that, I want to take a minute and go through the markets themselves. And this is a bit of a crowded slide, but I think it's some good information. The first thing I did is put some details on each of the markets underneath them on the left. And the key thing to show here is how different these ASEAN markets are. You range from countries with, here 30 million population up to almost 10 times that. The economic growth is very different. The economy size, the power, the penetration of the electricity sector, the size of that sector, how it's regulated, how it's governed, how things are paid. Really, almost every market is different, although there are some commonalities. So with that, I'm going to take a minute and go through each one. But the point there is the difference. Indonesia really is the sleeping giant of energy storage opportunities in this region. The barriers are very strong. I know there's a lot of frustration around renewable energy itself in Indonesia, and storage is a bit further away. Some of these barriers include, the regulatory structure, which is not supportive, the bureaucratic arrangement. A lot of incentive structures, as people know in Indonesia, prevent development. But the economics are so powerful and compelling that I do think someday they will win out. And so it may be with Indonesia, it may be a situation of keeping your eye on the market, maybe getting your feet wet, and understanding that although it may be a long haul, this could be a very lucrative market at some point. Again, the cheap power in the country, the cheap electricity costs and low renewable energy penetration really don't support storage models as much as they could. The island orientation with hundreds of islands really provides a huge amount of opportunities that are technically and economically viable, but there are barriers to those. And I think myself, like everyone else does, hope that the current slumber in Indonesia, the current slow period will not be permanent, and that one day Indonesia will see its potential and become on and be the giant market that it could be. Malaysia is quite a different market now. We see Here it's a small but quite sophisticated market. There's very strong local competition and has been limited opportunities for outside players. But there's some positive factors going on. Some of the declining gas supplies have led to plans to remove subsidies to create exposure to market for players. And although there's some limited renewable energy penetration, it is increasing. They do have a very sophisticated renewable energy policy. There are potentials for behind-the-meter applications, for transmission support, and for ancillary services, which are priced in Malaysia. But I think these will take some time. It's also worth noting there are very unique conditions in Sabah and Sarawak, the island states of Malaysia. Generally, these countries have a power surplus, so it's not inherently a strong battery market, but there are also off-grid potential there. I mentioned at the outset that although Myanmar is not one of the 3 countries I highlighted as having the best opportunities, it actually is a very interesting market from a storage perspective and could actually turn into one of the better prospects. I think it's well known that Myanmar does not have a modern power grid. In fact, the grid there is very limited, very old, and not at all suited to the current economic activity or the growth the country hopes to see. But that having been said, the regulatory framework is still quite weak. The country has big hopes, plans, and aspirations, but doesn't necessarily yet have the forward vision that would help investors to move forward around that. On the renewable energy hybrid side, there's very limited opportunities, as there's very limited renewable energy, but there could be some potential around some of the larger solar plants at some point. Clearly, the grid itself could benefit from batteries on the T&D side to support supply of electricity. It's going to take some time for that to get paid for, but that could be a large opportunity. I don't think there's much on the behind the meter side, although a driver could be reliability, as some of the factories there do need to get more reliable electricity. But really the key point, the big one to take away here is the last point, that Myanmar government policy has been very supportive of microgrids. I think they understand that off-grid electricity or partially grid-connected electricity is going to be one of the ways that they get access to for power to their population. And that's something that the government's taking very seriously, and that's a very positive thing for that country. So with that, I'll move to the 3 countries where I do think there are more sort of near-term opportunities. The Philippines is really, I think, what the best prospect opportunity in ASEAN for a wide range of reasons and across a wide range of applications. The Philippines really is the one market that I would encourage people to look at. If you spend time in the Philippines, you can feel the excitement there of people looking at, planning, and starting to think about energy storage opportunities. And the market itself supports it more than any other market. The geographic conditions, the electricity market structure that gives clear price signals, higher prices for electricity in general, and then the need for additional electricity for access, all provide very strong drivers to push energy storage, and again, across a wide range of different applications. So although there's no need right now or no clear plans for renewable energy hybrid programs, there are quite a lot of large intermittent generators, and those could be useful in the future. I do know that there's a large number of grid-based batteries being planned with distribution units around the country due to the privatization. There may be a lot of small opportunities that really take some work, but that by building them up over time with strong partners, there are opportunities. The behind-the-meter model in the Philippines is probably the most interesting in this entire region. Again, the Philippines industry does pay very, very high electricity prices, and that creates a massive gap with solar. So recycling solar becomes very tempting economically. The Philippines does have a viable off-grid model. So it looks like there's a large number of applications in which people who currently have no power or limited power could viably get new electricity through microgrids, and batteries could play a role in supporting that. So I really do think the Philippines, there are more opportunities here than anywhere else, and it is positioned to be a leader in the region. I put Thailand on the list here largely because of the size of the country, the interest in technology, the importance of energy security as a driver for the country, and its maturity. But that having been said, there are some barriers to Thailand as well. It's a highly regulated market. There's not a lot of electricity growth. And so the current plans for batteries, and there are some fairly substantial plans, are for EGAT, the Electricity Authority, to put its own batteries on the grid. But it is a country that does have, again, the energy storage needs, does have an extensive grid, and the local industrial base is sophisticated, clever, and can make the right energy investments. So those provide some opportunities. There has been some momentum towards renewable energy hybrids in Thailand. There's been a move to looking at PPA structures to support that, and there is very serious concern around intermittency. So there may be opportunities for existing generators to put on a battery that would ease and smooth their production. You know, I mentioned earlier, EGAT is already installing 3 large grid-scale utility batteries. I believe the total of the 3 is around 30 megawatts, and they're primarily used for renewable energy, although some small one is used for energy access. But as I mentioned, the large industrial consumers really do provide a sophisticated energy management client, and energy storage could play a role in that. While I say the Philippines may have the most opportunities, in many ways, I think Vietnam is the most exciting market in this region. And this may be a bit of a surprise. I'd say as recently as 5 years ago, Vietnam was considered a conservative, regulated market. It was not considered dynamic or exciting. And there were some concerns about the openness of the government to foreign investment, to the IPP or open market that had been seen in other countries. However, I feel that's transformed dramatically. The rapid growth in Vietnam, driven by industrialization, driven by the popularity of the country with industry and with manufacturing, really has put energy security among the top issues facing the country's leadership. I believe that the Prime Minister, the Politburo, the leadership, all the way down to industry, understands that bringing on energy for industry, for the people, is part of the recipe of success for the country, and they've made massive reform steps. The bullet point here about the recent boom of variable renewable energy is very important, because it does mean that there'll be 4 gigawatts of solar power possibly coming on in the next month or so by June, and this will very much strain the grid and provide some need for renewable energy for storage or systems to manage that. But I think it's worth taking a moment and highlighting what an accomplishment this renewable energy program is. You know, Vietnam will, in a very short period of time, perhaps 6 months or so, go from being one of the smaller renewable energy countries in the region to being the largest in ASEAN. If Vietnam does bring on the 30-something projects and the 4 gigawatts of solar that are expected, Vietnam will jump rapidly to being the largest solar, have the largest amount of operating solar of any country in the region. The fact that comes on very, very quickly really is going to stress the grid and create problems. But Vietnam does need this much power, 4 gigawatts per year going forward. So absolutely fascinating story. So how Vietnam deals with the 4 gigawatts of electricity coming on and lack of transmission will be interesting. It could be a potential driver. I don't think there's much yet on the behind the meter side, as companies are still paying reasonable and slightly subsidized electricity prices, and the current regime supports net metering, or looks to support a net metering, which takes away some of the requirement for a battery. But I really do believe that right now Vietnam is the most dynamic market in ASEAN for energy storage, for renewable energy, and for other things, and so a very important one to keep an eye on, in my view. So with that sort of high-level look at the countries being done, I wanted to draw on that to show you a little bit of what a screening process could kind of look like here, to look at what opportunities would be. And so what I've done is I've taken the 4 business models I mentioned on the left, the revenue models on the top, and look at where there could be opportunities for these to match up. Again, I think the key lesson, if you go from right to left across the horizontal columns, renewable energy hybrid is really pretty much only likely in countries where a large amount of renewable energy generation has come on, and that's stressing the grid, and their countries looking for ways to manage that. That really is just Thailand, the Philippines now, and Vietnam very soon. I think pretty much every country could look at grid-based batteries in one way or another. And again, the nature of some of the countries, Myanmar that has a very limited grid, Indonesia and the Philippines with challenging geography, there may be creative ways and unique ways that batteries can play very, very important roles in these countries. It will take some effort to figure out how each of these countries will fund these, will pay for them, the role for the private sector and the public sector. But I do think that we'll see more grid-based batteries or more batteries on the grid in the near future. I find behind the meter to be a very interesting model, particularly because as it does work with the private sector, unlike some of the other energy sector markets, behind the meter is sort of unconstrained by regulation. It's driven by economics. And as soon as it works, as soon as it is the best way of doing things, it can take off without having to depend on regulations on that type of requirement or any kind of a government push. Again, I don't think it's ready just yet in any of these markets. I don't think there's a giant behind the meter opportunity that's just waiting to be had. I do believe that there are facilities in the Philippines now that could put batteries online in combination with solar, and that would be an economically viable or commercially attractive thing to do. So I do believe in the Philippines those opportunities exist, and I think they'll be closer in other countries. A very important thing to note with behind the meter is that it really does compete almost directly with a net metering regulation or net metering model. So countries that have a very generous net metering basically are allowing the grid to serve as a battery. That takes away the need for your own battery. So the Philippines has some limited net metering. Thailand has very limited net metering. But Vietnam may be moving into a system where it's very easy to sell rooftop into the grid. We have to wait till July to see if this is approved. But it's very important to understand the philosophy of a country towards accepting power back into the grid. Again, the more willing they are to let the grid serve as a battery, the less likelihood that a battery itself is needed. And then finally, to look at microgrids, I've already pretty much summed this up, but that really Indonesia and the Philippines right now are the places where these markets are emerging. I probably could and should put Myanmar as an actual opportunity. There are microgrids, lots of opportunities occurring there. The uses for batteries that I'm aware of so far are very, very small. But it's probably worth, for companies that are looking at a microgrid market, I think it's certainly not too early to consider Myanmar as one of the hottest opportunities in this region, and certainly one for batteries. But the point of this is that these opportunities are emerging. It's a judgment call, and different people may put different things in different categories. But I do think that it makes a lot of sense to look across the region to understand what each country is doing, what the opportunities are, and how to approach them. So with that, what I want to do is kind of wrap up and take one final look at the energy storage, sort of business development approach here and walk back through it. What I have here is a little bit generic. I think some of these processes apply equally for every sector. But I think a key point that I really want to make on energy storage markets is I think understand the economics. Over time, these will be economically driven markets. I think in the short term, you may see some subsidies, some incentive programs, but I think the regional countries are getting very comfortable with a commercial approach to markets, to grid parity, and to not paying to extra to everybody competing on an equal footage. So to me, economics have got to drive storage projects. If the economics aren't there, I'm not sure the long run will be there. I think it's important, again, to identify, screen, and rank business segments in each country. And I think this is pushing down very, very deep to understanding, again, exactly who the partners are, what the regulations are, what the costs implicit are how you're able to get revenues, and then how that may change. Obviously, again, these are very dynamic markets, and what's happening in 5 years may be more important than what's happening today. again, and that's where I think I've already highlighted point 3, but I think the future is what's important. Around the world, this has been a sector of massive, massive rapid change. So far, we haven't seen that in ASEAN, but it could happen quite quickly. I do think that ASEAN markets are small, they are unique, they are bespoke, and I think the rewards are going to go to people who can match their offerings to ASEAN needs. I think it does speak to an opportunity for smaller players, for focused players who are I think the larger players will tend to put their efforts into the Chinas, into the Koreas, into the US and Europe. But I do think that for more nimble, smaller niche players that can really work, ASEAN has some fantastic opportunities. But again, it does come to adjusting your products to that, to matching the needs, to understanding the markets, working here, customizing things, trying to make things bespoke. And if that doesn't work for the company, maybe the ASEAN is not the market for you. Again, I think partners are crucial. Across the different range of business models here, partners can provide access to clients, provide access to government, to regulatory knowledge or insights that you may not have. And then it's just a question of taking all this information together and packaging it and pulling it together. So that's my message for today. I hope this has all been useful. Again, I think I'll close the session today with the concepts that I started on and that Jane highlighted in the beginning. I think these are very, very early days to get into ASEAN. It's the right time to start in the market. I think we're going to see a few challenging years going ahead, but I do think this is an area with a massive opportunity for change. The economics support a wide range of business models, and I do see that ASEAN will be a fulfilling market and a successful market for those that put the effort into building the business here. I'm closed off with my contact information, and if anybody would like to reach out to me if there are any questions I can answer, please feel free to contact me at any time. So thank you all very much, and thank you very much, Jane, for your help.
Thank you, Jack. Thank you for your presentation. I've got one question. So you mentioned the foreign development or the foreign developer could find some partnership requirements via the local government, right?
That's right.
So I think if I am a developer, I will curious about how can I find the requirements or how to be familiar with the local punishment requirements.
Okay. That's a very good question. In a lot of ways, when you get to regulation or required requirements for these, they can be quite different in most of the countries. In Vietnam, for example, you're able to set up a company and wholly own that company. In the Philippines, companies that use natural resources like the solar side of the business do require a 40%, maximum 40% ownership by foreign companies. And so I think those are some things that law firms or some background research can uncover. But fundamentally, I think sometimes partners are more important on sort of the non-regulated aspect of it, that ways that can help you get into a business. Again, a lot of the ways businesses are done in these countries can be quite different than how it's done in other countries. But in any place in the world, the locals will have better access to customers, to regulators. So I think if, for example, if I were a business looking to go into the Philippines and go to compete in a behind the meter business, the first thing I'd be looking for is who can introduce me to behind the meter clients, who can help me find possible opportunities of people who are looking at this kind of project. How can I talk to clients? How can I understand what opportunities they're facing, what the regulatory structures are? So a lot of it will be introducing developers or other participants to their counterparties, to clients, but also to understand the different details on the ground that are harder to figure out when you're the local presence.
Thank you, Jack. Do you think the behind the meter application will be the first wave for the energy storage around the ASEAN?
But I actually don't think there will be any first wave around ASEAN. I think that goes back to the point that I think all these countries are quite different. You know, I do think, say, in Myanmar, the likelihood will be microgrids. I think in Vietnam, the batteries will be more likely to be needed first to deal with the massive penetration of renewable energy. But I do see behind the meter applications as a very interesting one and a compelling one. Again, partially because of the industrial counterparty and the very clear economics. I do think the Philippines is a country where behind the meter applications currently work the best. But I think I think it would be very important, I think, going forward for companies to better manage their own energy use to improve their energy profiles. I think batteries can play a role in that. And then behind the meter has a potential pathway into virtual power plants where you could have a cluster of industries that are sharing resources together. So they can go kind of across the meter into a virtual power concept where they can share some of these resources. So I think it's one where there's a lot of very exciting potential pathways for long-term growth. But then again, it depends on the provider. Those projects will probably be too small for some people. They may not match certain technologies. But for people that are interested in a behind the meter model or an energy management based model, I do think ASEAN will provide opportunities in that area.
Yeah, I think so. I agree with you about every country have their unique characters. One more question. Do you think the safety assessment of the energy storage station like this need are also necessary to be considered in the developing of ASEAN?
I think very much so, and I think that's a very good question. In fact, I saw today in the news there's another story of a hydrogen facility in Korea this time that's had an accident. So, as you're right, you do see this in cars, and I think there could be a real issue with public perception. I think there's some concern that electric vehicles and perhaps batteries could appear to be dangerous. I don't see this as a long-term impediment to the development of the sector, but I think one thing it does do is speak to the fact that you need qualified operators, qualified developers, and that when we saw the solar power boom in this region, and solar power, particularly with a PPA or a feed-in tariff, was a very easy business that anybody could do. You could almost have a trucking company or a building company go into solar power. You know, that clearly is not the case with batteries. I do think that batteries, as I mentioned, are very complex technology going into a complex system. There's a lot of analysis, a lot of proper planning to be done. And I think safety is an incredibly important concern. And so I do think the market is going to favor the quality players that can come in and provide that wrap an entire package of quality, of safety, and efficiency together.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for your answer. And so this will be the end of today's webinar. The recordings and slides will soon be uploaded on the website of Leader Associates. If our audience, you have any questions, please contact me or leave your opinions and questions at our interactive platform, Energy Circle on LinkedIn. By the way, please keep in mind of our latest event on June the 24th to 25th on Seoul, South Korea, the Global Solar Plus Energy Storage Congress and Expo. There will be over 1,000 industrial stakeholders attending, ranging from policymakers, investors, developers, EPCs, and manufacturers. On this event, we will share not only the market outlook for South Korea, but also from the United States, Europe, ASEAN, Australia, and any other emerging market. Also, another event called the 4th ASEAN Solar Plus Energy Storage will be held on November the 11th to 12th in Manila, the Philippines. Please contact my colleagues if you are interested. Thank you very much for listening, and I'm looking forward to welcoming you to our latest event in June or other event upcoming. Thank you, Jack. It's very interesting and impressive presentation. And will you come to our Korean event this June?
I'm not sure if I'll be in the Korea event, but I did join the ASEAN storage last year. I thought that was a fantastic event and a huge amount of buzz and excitement in the Philippines. And so I'll certainly be at that one again. And I also very much enjoyed the webinar today. So thank you for all your help, Jane.
Thank you also. And I'm looking forward to seeing you this November.
I look forward to that.
So have a nice day.
You too. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much.
Bye-bye.
Bye.